Are we good to go for live streaming? Okay, all right. So welcome and good evening. I don't know about you, but yesterday, I liked the presentation about the sleep. I liked the presentation about the charcoal. Man, I was telling my wife last night, while we were driving back, and today I was saying, man, we need this, right? These are good and wonderful information that the pharmaceutical companies are not wanting to let us know. You know, we have learned that there are ways to fight measles naturally. And there are natural ways to fight, whether it be weight or whether it be malaria. So I'm so excited, and I believe that you enjoyed it. And I pray that you will not only enjoy it, but you will apply it also. And after you have applied, tell with your friends. Share with your friends and your neighbors. The best way to do it by having you apply it first. And you can say, guess what? I did it, it worked, and I want you to try. You think that's possible? And you know, we have been sharing and we have been passing flyers and advertisement about this presentation. But one thing we also notice is that even though we have passed out a lot of flyers, it's not working as much as we would like. And the best is having you share and present it to your friends and others as a friend. That's the most effective way to share about these wonderful things. So tonight, I'm very thankful that Martin, you decided to come and spend time with us and to share with us all these great things about God and natural remedies and about all the things that God had created for our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So tonight, we are going to look more into that. And if you need a pen, let me know. I have lots of pens. And if you need papers, we can share papers, you know. And then I want you to take note. If you don't have papers and pencil to take note and you have a phone, you can snap whatever and however much you want. Take pictures. And then if you miss anything, you can go back and watch. We are live streaming it. That means you can share with your friends this live stream recording so that they can watch, they can learn. And if there's any question, please feel free to ask Martin and his team, and they are here in person. So feel free to ask them in person after the presentation, or if you don't remember what to share, you can, ask them later also. All right? So why don't we have a prayer, and let's pray that our God will bless everything. Huh? Oh Lord our God, tonight, as we hear once again your son Martin, as he shares about you and how you have created the world and the natural things in it to be healing for us. As he shares with all of us, may we not only understand, but help us to apply in our lives. And as we see the benefit of you working in our lives through the natural remedies, through the natural things, may we be able to share with others about you and how you can work in their lives through all these natural remedies and natural things. Thank you, Father. Thank you for what you have done, and thank you for what you will do. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. And we are very happy that Martin's wife and mother-in-law are here. So we are thankful for that. Okay, so do you need something for us to do? Okay, all right. You will have to mirror again. Yeah. All right, so with technology, when it works, it's fantastic. When it doesn't work, it's a pain. But we are hoping and praying that it will work. And that's what we are going to do right now. How many of you were able to stay around last night? Some of you did? That's good. Yeah. So while they are here in person, I think that would be something good for you to, to take advantage of. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. So I'm glad it's working now.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to use this one.
And then I will have, I'll have someone with a mic. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and the mic will come to you because we have people that are listening online, and I want to make sure that they hear your question. Okay? Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome. My name is Martin Klein from Klondike Mountain Health Retreat in Washington State. And you all got all of our winter. We've had no snow pretty much this winter, and we normally have about 3 feet, so it dumped down here instead, I guess. So, how many are here tonight for the first time tonight? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, good. Welcome. And welcome to those who were here last night, too. What's that? Okay. Okay, we're giving a special thing here to those of you who came for the first time tonight. Raise your hands again. And we'll do one per family because we only have a few of these. And I think there was somebody over here too. So let me just give you a little outline of our program. Some of you have asked about what are the topics we're going to cover. This is the titles for the week. Last night we did When There Are No Medicines, what to do in case of a disaster when standard medical options are not available. And tonight we're doing the Science of Addictions, how food companies are keeping you addicted and how to outsmart them. And then Friday night we're going to do Ancient Remedies. And I'll leave a little bit of that to your imagination until we get there. And then Saturday night, we're going to leave also some things to your imagination. We're going to talk about an explosive natural remedy. You won't want to miss that. And we're also going to talk about hydrotherapy. Sunday, we'll talk about avoiding heart attacks and strokes. Monday, weight loss without hunger. Tuesday, reversing diabetes type 2 in 3 weeks. So these are some amazing topics, and you won't want to miss any of them. And they're at each evening at 6 o'clock, just like this one. So don't miss that. We also have...
A gift for those who were here last night.
Okay. So
2
we...
nights in a row.
So we have a special gift, one per family again, for everybody who is here 2 nights in a row. So raise your hands as she passes those out. So listen, I'm also going to have, we talked about consultation times. So we are going to make Monday and Tuesday available for consultations. We're going to try to keep those consultations to 1 hour apiece. Sometimes, a lot of times at our clinic and our health retreat, a consultation will take a lot longer than that. Typically, it's more like 2 hours minimum, but we'll try to keep those a little bit more short. We're not licensed in this state to do any treatments, so it'll be educational purposes only, but if you want to ask us some specific questions related to yourself or some more private questions or whatever the case may be, or then we can have a consultation. Those are going to be charged at $90, which is our normal consultation fee. So let us know the times. Talk to my wife for signing up for those times, Monday and Tuesday, and that'll be obviously during the day before the meetings. And so we'll try to probably group them a little bit if we can. So whoever signs up first will probably determine, if we're going to group them later or earlier in the day. So I think those are our housekeeping items for the evening. And let's go ahead and get started with our subject. This is a very important and serious subject. Science of addiction, how food companies are keeping you addicted and how to outsmart them. This is a really critical topic for overcoming any addiction, okay? I'm not just talking about smoking or alcohol. Those are important addictions to overcome. But I'm also talking about food addictions or sexual addictions or media addictions or anything like that. All of this is going to apply to any kind of addiction, okay? And so it's very, very broad spectrum and very useful. So here is an old-fashioned advertisement. Dr. Batty's For Your Health Asthma Cigarettes. Can you believe this? Since 82. It says, for the treatment, for the temporary relief of the paroxysms of asthma. Can you believe the doctors were trying to sell cigarette smoking for treating asthma? And it goes on and it says, effectively treats asthma, hay fever, foul breath, all diseases of the throat, head colds, canker sores, bronchial irritations. Not recommended for children under 6. Can you believe that? And so, you know, things have really not changed that much, and you're going to see why I say that in just a minute. This has changed a little bit. At least we have rules now so that it's not marketed to children, or at least, well, it is marketed to children. It's just not sold to children. But we're going to talk about how things have not changed. So last night we talked about what Robert F. Kennedy said. Excuse me. He said in an interview with Dr. Phil on April 29 of last year, when my uncle was president, 3% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% do. When my uncle was president and I was a 10-year-old boy, we spent 0 on chronic disease in this country. Now, 90 to 95% of what we spend on healthcare is going to treat chronic disease. We have 10,000 ingredients in our foods. In Europe, they have only 400. Most of the stuff we put in our food is banned in Europe. This should give you some ideas as to why we're so sick. Look at how sick we are. We spend more than anybody else on healthcare, and we have some of the worst health. So if you eat anything that looks like this, you're getting your share of some of those 10,000 ingredients that are causing this kind of chronic illness in this country. I'm going to share a couple of clips with you here from that interview with RFK.
We spend 2 to 3 times what any other country in the world spends on healthcare, and we have the worst outcomes. We're literally the sickest people in the world. We have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world. During COVID, we had the highest death rate from COVID of any country in the world. So we had 16% of the COVID deaths in the United States, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population.
All right, so that's some serious statistics, right? I mean, we supposedly have the latest, greatest gadgets and technology and medications, but we did the worst on COVID. And we have all this chronic disease burden. Now, here's something else he said here. And I think this slide is actually, yeah. I don't know if this is repeating or not. I'll have to check this. In the 1980s, the tobacco companies were the most cash-rich companies in the world. They saw the writing on the wall with litigation, regulatory headwinds, shrinking customer base, so they began to diversify and they targeted food companies. This is what RFK said.
In 1994, the 2 biggest food companies in the world were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, or tobacco companies. They took thousands of scientists that were involved in making tobacco more addictive and more attractive, particularly to kids. And they transferred those science to their food division, and those scientists went into the lab and began creating ingredients and identifying ingredients that make food addictive.
So literally, the tobacco companies, as their base was shrinking and less people were smoking, they started actually buying up food companies. And so by 1994, the tobacco companies, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, were the biggest food companies in the world. These are some of the brands that are owned by tobacco companies. And it's not just me that's saying this, it's not just RFK that's saying this. Here you have Forbes magazine is saying the same thing. Did tobacco companies also get us hooked on junk food? New research says yes. So you see how we're sick in this country? And you can see probably one of the major root causes right here. Here are some of the connections between all your major food manufacturers. They're all interconnected. They're all owned and sub-owned and leased and subleased and whatever else they do. Johnson & Johnson owning a bunch of food companies. Very interesting. Yes, and Procter & Gamble, those are supposed to be drug companies, right? All right, so Dr. Neil Barnhart writes an interesting book called Breaking the Food Seduction. Is food seducing us today? It is. And he's telling you, giving you some ideas on how to overcome these seductions. Now, I want to show you it goes actually further than what you think, and we're going to talk about this in detail. But if you think that the chemical companies, the tobacco companies are owning these things, they put all their scientists on putting things into the foods to make them addictive, listen to this, or look at this. What do you see that is in common with all these different logos? What do they have in common? Yeah, but design-wise. Yellow and red, yellow or red, or both. Is that right? Yellow or red or both. Every single one of them. Don't you find that interesting? Do you know why they do that? Well, let me just tell you one more thing. Think of the decorations in any one of these places. What color is it? Yellow or red or both, right? You will never find a successful fast food restaurant that is decorated in blue. Because scientists have figured out that blue, the color blue, is an appetite suppressant. Yes. And the colors red and yellow are appetite stimulants. So they are literally decorating their place to manipulate your mind to eat more food. Think about when you've gone on a picnic and you've laid out on a blanket and looked up at the blue sky as you've eaten your picnic. How many times when you've done that can you think of that you stuffed yourself way so that you were like, you knew you ate way too much? Did you ever do that? No, you didn't, right? No, why? Because you have the blue sky to look at. But you did that in the restaurant, didn't you? Mm-hmm. All right, so let's uncover some of these tricks that they're doing to keep us addictive. In order to do that, we're going to go back a little ways and look at some physiology, and then we're going to look at some history. This is a nerve cell, and it looks like a little bit like a tree. You have there the branches at the top, they're called the dendrites, and then you have the cell body, that's like the eagle's nest in the tree. You have the axon, which is surrounded by the myelin sheath, that's like the trunk with the bark around it. And then you have your terminal ending at the bottom. And these nerve cells are all through our nervous system, all through our body, lots of them in our brain, of course, but they control our muscles and everything, and they have connections with other nerve cells. So a nerve signal comes as an electrical signal down that axon like a wire. And the bark of the tree, or the myelin sheath, is like the insulation on the wire, okay? And these terminal endings, they're making connections between the different nerve cells, and those connections are called the synapse. That's this little gap right here, and that you could compare to a light switch. If you took apart a light switch, inside that light switch you'd find that there was two positions, and one of those positions closed a circuit, right? And that allows the electricity to pass through that circuit. And when you flip the switch the other way, it opens the circuit, and that stops the electricity from passing through that circuit. Is that right? Well, that's how these switches work, only these are way more complicated in our body than a regular on and off switch. We just have on and offs, maybe some three-ways, and a few dimmers. That's about all we have, right, for switches. But in our body, there's hundreds or thousands of neurotransmitters, and those neurotransmitters are little chemical messengers that jump across that little gap and complete that electrical signal. So the electrical signal comes down the wire, it gets to the synapse, it can only cross that little gap if the switch gets closed. It's the neurotransmitter that closes the switch and allows that signal to pass on to the next nerve. This all happens in fractions of a second. And there's hundreds or maybe even thousands of different neurotransmitters. And those different neurotransmitters do different things to the signal. So it's a little different than a switch. It's way more complicated than a switch because it could attenuate the signal. It could boost the signal, depending on which neurotransmitter is doing the signal transmission. What happens if you took one of these switches and you found that little gap and you stuffed some tinfoil in the gap? What's going to happen? You're going to get some sparks, right? What happens if you stuff a bunch of little neurotransmitters in that gap. Too many. You're going to get some sparks. It's going to start short-circuiting nerves. So keep that in the back of your mind, no pun intended, as we, it is in your mind that this is happening, just in case you were wondering. All right, as we look at some history, let's have a look. Actually, before we get to the history, let's talk a little bit more about some physiology. This is just some extra credit, fun facts about our nervous system that will blow your mind. The axon portion of the nerve cell in many nerve cells is less than 1/1,000,000th of an inch long. That's that trunk part of the nerve, less than 1/1,000,000th of an inch long in many nerve cells. And some other nerve cells have an axon that's over 1 yard long. Which nerve cells are those? Spinal cord, yep. Your spinal cord is one big bundle of axons. Yep. You have 100 billion neurons and about 60,000 miles of circulation in your brain. The nerve cells make 1,000 trillion contact points with each other. There are 10 million times more connections in the average brain than there are galaxies in the known universe. I told you it was going to blow your mind, right? It's like there's a universe inside that head of yours. The rate of neuron growth in early pregnancy for the developing fetus is 250,000 neurons developing per minute. So mom does something unhealthy for 4 minutes, there went 1,000,000 neurons in the baby's developing brain. Wow. The brain is only about 2% of the body's weight, but it consumes 20% of the body's oxygen and 25% of the glucose. It's very, very metabolically active. That's why when you're thinking really hard, kids, like you're taking a test at school, or maybe you're studying for the test, yeah? You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes you start to get what? A headache. Why? Your brain is starting to overheat, right? If you do something really that requires a lot of calculating with your computer, like rendering a video or something like that, pretty soon the fans start coming on and the thing starts getting hot, right? It's trying to cool off the CPU because it's really thinking hard. That's what happens in your brain. You start using a lot of extra energy in the brain and you start getting a headache because it's really heating up. All right. Now let's talk about some history. I call this exciting history, and you'll see why I say that in a minute. In 1908, Dr. Kikune Aikida, working in the laboratories of the Imperial University of Tokyo, discovered something that became a multi-billion-dollar business. He noticed that the seaweed called kombu that the Japanese put in their food had taste-enhancing properties, and he was trying to isolate the chemical in the seaweed that was responsible for this characteristic. He discovered that the mysterious flavor enhancer was an amino acid or a protein called glutamate. You may recognize this glutamate from the popular compound monosodium glutamate, or MSG. Yes? You've heard of that? Anybody not heard of that? Okay, looks like most people's heard of it. Well, Dr. Aikida joined with a friend, Dr. Suzuki, and he formed a company called Ajinomoto, which means the essence of taste in Japanese, to manufacture this new compound. By 1933, the Japanese were using over 10 million pounds of taste enhancers per year. During World War II, the Americans encountered the Japanese military rations, and they said, whoa, how come this tastes so good and ours tastes so bad? What are they adding to the food? And so this led to the Americans figuring out that the compound that was being added was glutamate. And so the Americans started using it. End of World War II. No one questioned the safety of the substance. After all, it was just an amino acid or a protein. And so American usage has doubled every decade since the 1940s. You can imagine if it's doubling every decade, then probably it's going to be causing some significant health effects if there's a problem with it by now, right? All right. By the 1940s, scientists actually knew that glutamate was found in large concentrations in the brain. They actually thought that it was maybe the primary fuel of the brain. They were not correct. What is the fuel of the brain? Anybody? Glucose, yes, glucose. The brain runs on glucose. That doesn't mean the brain is healthy when you feed it just plain refined glucose. The body likes to break stuff down, okay? But in 1949, Dr. Wheel Malherbe tested a group of developmentally disabled children to see if the glutamate would improve their mental function, since he thought it might be the fuel of the brain. Fortunately, the experiment was a failure, and you're going to see why, fortunately, I say fortunately, in a minute. In 1954, a neuroscientist by the name of Dr. T. Hayashi found that glutamate could cause convulsions, seizures, and he proposed that it might be a central synaptic transmitter. Guess what? He was right. You remember we talked about the nerve cell, right? And the synapse, and that little gap, which is like a switch, and the neurotransmitter that jumps across there? Guess what? Glutamate is the most common excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. It's one of those little chemicals that jumps the synapse. So now, remember I said what happens if you stuff some tinfoil in the switch? So now, what happens when you're going to stuff a bunch of glutamate in your switch? Sparks. You're going to start blowing fuses. We'll see why and how in just a minute. In 1959, two researchers, when working with muscle tissue of invertebrate crustaceans, crabs, found that when they put the glutamate on the muscles would contract vigorously. In 1957, two ophthalmology students, Lucas and Newhouse, tested MSG and aspartate, which is another amino acid that actually is a neurotransmitter, on baby mice. And to their surprise, listen carefully, to their surprise, these substances almost completely destroyed the nerve cells in the retinas of the animal's eyes. The worst damage was in the young mice, but even the adults showed significant injury. Their findings were published in a somewhat obscure ophthalmology journal and went relatively unnoticed for several years until Dr. Olney found it. In 1968, he noticed their research, and he was trying to research nerve pathways in the brain. So he repeated their experiment. He figured if he could kill some nerves in the brain, then he could trace the dead nerve cells and figure out where the nerves were going. Okay? But he found something even more shocking. He discovered that not only were nerves of the retinas being destroyed in the eyes, but nerves throughout critical areas of the brain were being killed. He was so disturbed by his findings because he was recognizing the danger to the public, since these substances were already widely used in the food industry. So he testified before a congressional hearing on the subject in 1969. So our government knows about this from all the way back at least 1969. Okay? Congressional hearing. Now, of course, when they call a congressional hearing, guess who else comes to the hearing? Anybody else who has an interest, which was the food companies. Yes, they were there. So as a result of this hearing, they said, okay, we will voluntarily remove these substances from baby food, because they didn't want the government putting any restrictions on them. They were putting it in the baby food. And then they said, but they also created a new category of food called toddler food. Ever wondered why you have baby food and toddler food? Okay, now you know the reason. So that they could circumvent their self-imposed restriction on baby food. So now, if you just get a little bit old enough to toddle, then it's okay to flood your brain with stuff that kills nerve cells in your brain. Huh? And they started using disguised names for the taste enhancers because they didn't want people to know what was going on. Okay?
With the mice, how did they administer that? Was that through food?
Yeah. All right. In 1974, Dr. Olney demonstrated that MSG fed to pregnant rhesus monkeys could cause brain damage to their offspring. He also went on to discover that rhesus monkeys were the most sensitive research animal to these things. He found that they were way more sensitive than the rats. Then he found that human adults are 4 times more sensitive than rhesus monkeys. And human children are 5 times more sensitive than human adults, meaning they're 20 times more sensitive than rhesus monkeys. You see how we're killing our kids from the time they're babies? By feeding them the stuff that these tobacco companies want us to eat. Now research has been done on many substances similar to MSG which also cause brain damage. Now let me read to you from a scientific article that was published by Dr. Olney. He's this one who did the congressional hearing and who was disturbed by his findings and who was researching. Well, he kept researching, and this is one of the articles he published in the Journal of Child Neurology. He said the following, listen carefully. The amount of MSG, monosodium glutamate, in a single bowl of commercially available soup is probably enough to cause blood glutamate levels to rise higher in a human child than levels that predictably cause brain damage in immature animals. Did you get that? Let me read it again. The amount of MSG in a single bowl of commercially available soup is probably enough to cause blood glutamate levels to rise higher in a human child than levels that predictably cause brain damage in immature animals. And he went on to discover that the humans were the most sensitive of all, more sensitive than the research animals. This is a serious issue. And this is one of the ways that the food manufacturers are keeping you addicted. Not just addicted to food, but to addicted to everything that they want to sell you. And it's not just the food manufacturers that are keeping you addicted. It's the medical industry that's keeping you addicted, and I'll show you the connection with that in a moment. It's also the media and entertainment industries that are keeping you addicted. Let's have a look. I'm just reading here from Wikipedia. Glutamate transporters are found in neuronal and glial membranes. They rapidly remove glutamate from the extracellular space. In brain injury or disease, they can work in reverse, and excess glutamate can accumulate outside the cells. This process causes calcium ions to enter the cells via the NMDA receptor channels, leading to neuronal damage and eventual cell death, and is called excitotoxicity. There has to be now, you have to understand, God made these substances and He made them to work in our body. They are neurotransmitters, is that correct? So we need them. But He made them and He put them in the food in the right amounts. He didn't make it for us to be consuming these massive amounts of free amino acids that go straight into the brain. It's like stuffing the switch with a bunch of tinfoil, right? It's not made for that. That blows fuses. So there's a very critical amount of glutamate that's supposed to be in the extracellular tissue, and it can't be more than that, and that's why these glutamate transporters are there. God made these transporters so that they'll quickly get the glutamate out of there so that they don't cause fuses to be blown. They don't cause sparks. And they carry them to special cells that store them and release them in the right amounts when you need them. But if you get too many, it stimulates the cells to death. And that's why they call it excitotoxicity. It literally gives you a buzz while it kills your brain cells. Does anybody here have any brain cells that they want to spare? I don't think I want to spare my brain cells. We've only got a few of them, right? I mean, there's a lot of them, but we need every one of them we can get. All right, so it's called excitotoxicity. Let's read another little bit here from Wikipedia. It says, excitotoxicity due to glutamate occurs as a part of the ischemic cascade and is associated with stroke and diseases like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, laterism, autism, some forms of mental retardation, and Alzheimer's diseases. Is there anybody here who wants one of those diseases? So we want to try to learn how to protect our brains from this kind of damage. And The reason why it can happen in some of these diseases is because sometimes if there's damage, especially to a part of the brain, then those cells that are damaged just start leaking out all their extra glutamate. And that glutamate that leaks out of those cells can now start frying all the cells around them, right? If you drop a camera in some water, then the water starts making short circuits inside the camera and it can start frying other circuitry in the camera, right? Same kind of thing is going on here. Here's a scientific article that says, a combination of impaired energy metabolism or impaired buffering of calcium and free radicals or endogenous or exogenous excitotoxins, that means endogenous is ones that occur inside the body, exogenous are ones that are outside the body, the ones that you're eating, right, may contribute to neuronal loss, nerve death, in human neurodegenerative disorders. It's common in scientific articles for them to really, like, understate things, right? Like they just proved it, but it may contribute to neurodegenerative disorders. All right, well, some people are going to say, well, hold on a second. I thought we have a blood-brain barrier. Have you heard of that, blood-brain barrier? Okay, well, the blood-brain barrier is an important part of our brain, and God made these vessels in our brain different than the vessels in the rest of our body. A blood-brain barrier isn't something like a firewall or some kind of a wall in your head. No, it's a special kind of blood vessel, okay? In the rest of your body, you have relatively large gaps on a microscopic level between the endothelial cells that make up the walls of the blood vessel, okay? So that things can diffuse straight through the sides of the blood vessel into the surrounding tissue. But in the brain, God made a protective mechanism so that those gaps are very tight junctions in the walls of the blood vessels. So these blood vessels in the brain are different. They don't have those holes in them, those microscopic holes. And that makes it so that stuff that's in the bloodstream doesn't get into the brain and damage the brain. It's a protective mechanism. And so if you get a bunch of extra glutamate in your bloodstream, the blood-brain barrier can help protect your brain from that glutamate. But the problem is there are several organs at the base of the brain, very important parts of the brain, called the circumventricular organs, that do not have blood-brain barriers. They don't have those special kind of blood vessels. So those parts of the brain can get fried even if the blood-brain barrier and the rest of the brain is intact. Is that right? Also, there's another problem, and that is certain things can temporarily or even permanently disrupt the blood-brain barrier. Things like a low blood sugar, a high fever, or a brain injury. Has anybody here never, ever, ever hit their head? Like hard enough to kind of really hurt and jar your brain? No? So we all have what? We all have some kind of a history of brain damage. Now, obviously, some of our brains are more damaged than others, right? As far as traumatic injuries. Anybody play football? Yeah, that would be some traumatic brain injuries, more than most. Anybody do boxing? Now there's some serious traumatic brain injury. Soccer? Yeah. Ice hockey? Yeah, she says. Uh-huh. Car accident. Stroke. Stroke is a type of brain injury. All right, so all of these things are going to disrupt your blood-brain barrier, which means that a certain part of your brain is now going to be leaky, which means when you eat a bunch of glutamate, that part of your brain is going to get overbuzzed. So think about this. Everybody knows that different parts of the brain control different parts of the body. Is that right? So we all have different injuries on all kinds of different places of our brain. So when we all eat the same meal, we're all going to go out of that meal with different symptoms. And we're never going to know or connect that it's the same thing causing the problem. Now, some might say, hang on a second, I thought amino acids are natural. Yes, they are natural. I mentioned this earlier. They are something that God made, and they are something that occur naturally in food that God made. But remember, God put them in the food, bound in fiber, in long chains of amino acids, which form proteins, in the correct quantities, what our body needs. The problem occurs when these amino acids are synthesized or broken down into their individual free amino acids by extraction, fermentation, isolation, concentration, and then put in the foods as a appetite stimulant and an addictant in order to give your brain a buzz so you eat more food. That's where the problem occurs. It's not that the problem is that you have some neurotransmitters there. The problem is you just stuffed too many in there, and now you've got blown fuses, sparks. All right, there are other substances besides glutamate that are neurotoxic and called excitotoxins, and they include aspartate or aspartame. Anybody heard of NutraSweet? Pure 100% brain poison. By the way, that's in just about all. Just about all gums. L-cysteine is another one. Glycine, kainate, 6-hydroxydopamine, quinolic acid. 6-hydroxydopamine is a neurotoxic synthetic organic compound used by researchers to selectively destroy dopaminergic and noradrenergic neurons in the brain. So when they want to destroy dopamine for research, this is what they do to animals so that they can. You know what happens when you destroy your dopaminergic nerve cells? Depression, yes. Parkinson's, things like that. Quinolinic acid is the biosynthetic precursor of nicotine, and quinolinic acid has potent neurotoxic effects, very toxic to the brain. L-cysteine is an interesting one because L-cysteine's toxicity depends on the presence of bicarbonate ion. What's bicarbonate? Baking soda or baking powder, right? Yeah, so baking soda or baking powder makes L-cysteine toxic. Now, the bread manufacturers add L-cysteine to their dough. What often goes in doughs as well? Baking powder and baking soda, yes? Are you starting to see why we have so many chronic illnesses in this country now? One recent study by Dr. Thomas Heafield showed that all the patients in a study with Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's had elevated levels of L-cysteine. Does anybody want one of those diseases? Last night we talked about one reason why people are so nutrient deficient, right? Let's give a quiz. Does anybody remember the reason? Soil, yeah. Why is the soil depleted? Roundup, glyphosate, yes. Did you know that glyphosate is also excitotoxicity, toxic, or at least it causes other things to become excitotoxic. Researchers in Spain have found that glyphosate crosses the blood-brain barrier and overstimulates neurotransmitters, receptors in various regions of the brain, causing neuronal excitotoxicity. That's a scientific article right there. Actually, that's a book by Stephanie Seneff. She's a top researcher from MIT. You were going to ask a question. Do you still have that?
Is it reversible?
Yes, that's the good news. Well, first of all, you want to get away from the cause, right? Last night we talked about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. That's one of the most powerful ways of healing a damaged brain. Unbelievably powerful. Eating a good diet, getting exercise, fresh air, following laws of health is also going to definitely help. But hyperbaric oxygen therapy is a very, very powerful way to help the brain heal. Okay. Now, I want to start connecting this to different addictions, okay? So watch this. Everybody knows that addictive substances or almost everybody knows that addictive substances are stimulating the dopamine pathways. You've heard that, right? It's like the dopamine is what makes you feel good. And so street drugs and things that people get high on and basically most addictive substances, alcohol, tobacco, are stimulating somehow some kind of neurotransmitter signals in your brain. Usually dopamine, sometimes GABA. That's fairly well known and understood in research, and even a lot of people know that, just they've heard that dopamine receptors have something to do with pleasure and they have something to do with addiction. But listen, this is not as well understood. Listen to this. Reward-related stimuli conveyed through glutamatergic afferents promote burst firing of dopamine neurons, mainly driven by ionotropic glutamate receptor binding activation at the dopaminergic cells. Now that's a mouthful of scientific language from a scientific article, but you can get, by now you have enough background to understand what it's saying, right? What they're saying is this reward-related stimuli from the dopamine cells is conveyed through the glutamatergic pathways. So this glutamate cycle and the dopamine cycle are just totally interrelated. So the buzz that people try to get with the dopamine system by some kind of addictive substance is actually being tripped off by glutamate. Now you see why the drug companies or the food manufacturers want these things in the food? It's all interrelated. It's all interrelated. Now, I'm going to show you something even more powerful than this. Let's get a little bit more specific. Let's talk about alcohol for a second, okay? Look at this. This comes from a book called Translations of Addiction Science into Practice. By the way, this is a highly scientific book, and it's a whole bunch of scientific articles. And this book is the kind of book that somebody who is looking to help people get free of addictions might use to know how to do that. But it's also the same kind of book that somebody who's looking to addict you to the food would also probably like science. Is that right? All right, so notice this is an article in that book called The Imbalance Between Neuroexcitatory and Neuroinhibitory Amino Acids. Glutamate is an amino acid, right? Causes cravings for ethanol. What is ethanol? That's alcohol. That's the kind of alcohol that people use to get drunk. Okay, that's the scientific term for it, ethanol. I know they put it in the gasoline too. That tells you how much you would want to eat it, right? Now notice what they say here. This should blow your mind. So before I read this, listen, when somebody's an alcoholic and they are actively detoxing, meaning that they're trying to stop drinking, but they're going through withdrawals, they have something that the scientists call delirium tremens, right? DTs. You've heard of this? And if they detox too quickly, the DTs can cause seizures and death. You can die from the detoxification process. Listen, what is causing that seizure? Listen to this article right here. An increase in glutamate occurs in alcohol detoxification, which is responsible for all symptoms and implicated in the relapse of detoxified alcoholics. Do you get what that's saying? When you suddenly withdraw from alcohol, for whatever reason, there's a massive spike in glutamate in your brain, and it's that spike in glutamate that causes the seizures and death. This tells you how dangerous glutamate is. I don't know exactly what the mechanism for that increase is, but that's what happens, and that's the thing that causes the seizures. And I'm going to tell you in a little bit about some patients with seizures, how we help them with knowing this knowledge, okay? Now think about this for a second, though. Let's say somebody's detoxified properly and they haven't gone through seizures and they're trying to stop alcohol, okay? And then they go out for a restaurant to eat. And what do they eat? A whole pile of glutamate. And what does it trigger? It triggers them to go back to the alcohol. You see how the food companies are keeping you addicted to the alcohol? And we're going to see it's not just alcohol in just a second. Watch this. Here's another scientific article. This is Frontiers in Neurology. It says, studies reveal that the upregulation of glutamate transporter is a promising method of treating drug addiction. And it also suggests that glutamate transporter is involved in drug addiction induced by various different kinds of addictive drugs. However, the underlying mechanism is still unclear. They say upregulating glutamate transporters. Now, what are the glutamate transporters? Those are the little things that go in and grab the glutamate out of the extracellular space and carry them off to the astrocytes where they store them so that they don't build up too much. So what they're saying is if we could transport more glutamate out of the brain, we could treat drug addictions. Well, how about this? How about not transporting more glutamate into the brain? Wouldn't that be a solution that makes more sense? You know what they're trying to do here with upregulating the transmitters? I mean the transporters? They're trying to develop a drug that will do that. So the drug company, rather than telling you, hey, don't eat glutamate, they want to make a drug that's going to help you deal with the glutamate that they're feeding you. And that's not just speculation on my part. I'm going to show you the proof for that, okay? Watch this. Here's a drug called memantine. Memantine. We'll talk about this more on the next slide too. But this article, listen, this article mentions hypersexuality, gambling and internet gaming, cocaine and amphetamines, opioids, morphine and heroin, nicotine as addictions connected not just to dopaminergic but also to glutamatergic mechanisms. What this means is that the food you're eating is making it so you cannot have victory over your addiction, your other addictions. Now, watch this. Memantine, that's the generic name for that drug. Its brand name is called Namenda. And it's actually an anti-Alzheimer's drug. But now they're talking about using it for helping people get over addictions. Here's what Wikipedia says about this drug. It says a dysfunction of the glutamatergic transmission manifested as neuronal excitotoxicity is hypothesized or thought to be involved in the etiology or cause of Alzheimer's disease. What they're telling you is Alzheimer's is somehow connected to glutamate transmission and excitotoxicity. And so they say targeting the glutamatergic system, specifically the NMDA receptors, this is what the drug does. By the way, NMDA receptors is how it got its name, Namenda, offers a novel approach to treatment in view of the limited efficacy of existing drugs targeting the cholinergic system. All right, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that's interconnected here. Now, watch this. One of the things that caffeine does is it suppresses something in your brain called adenosine. You know what adenosine is? Adenosine is another neurotransmitter. But unlike glutamate, glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, it gives you a buzz. Adenosine is a calming neurotransmitter. It's what helps you go to sleep. So caffeine is suppressing adenosine. That's why it wakes you up, because adenosine is what helps you go to sleep. So it's suppressing what helps you go to sleep. But you know what adenosine's other job is? And one of the ways in which it helps calm you down? Adenosine modulates the activity of glutamate. So caffeine is knocking out your body's ability to deal with the glutamate. Let's think of an example here. Let's think about Aunt Nellie. She's in the nursing home for Alzheimer's, okay? Aunt Nellie wakes up in the morning, every morning, and the first thing that happens, besides her getting dressed and all that, is the nurse comes by with her memantine, her Namenda, right? Which is supposed to block glutamate in the brain to help her Alzheimer's. The next thing that happens is the caregiver brings her morning coffee, which knocks out her body's ability to deal with glutamate. The next thing that happens is she goes to breakfast and she gets served a plate full of glutamate. It's no wonder Aunt Nellie's confused. She's got chemical warfare going on in her brain. Watch this little clip.
Could that daily dose of caffeine be changing your brain? We turned to researchers in Wake Forest in North Carolina, where I underwent 2 MRI brain scans. This first scan with no caffeine in my system. Then I downed just 1 drink. Now my second MRI. This was my brain before caffeine. This was after. The difference was remarkable.
It's like a 40% drop in the blood flow to your brain. So that's a lot.
Said before caffeine, with caffeine, the blood flow to my brain dropped about 40%.
40%.
Really?
Yes.
Why the drop? Caffeine blocks a chemical called adenosine, which controls blood flow to the brain. Add caffeine, blood vessels constrict, less blood circulates in the brain, and your blood pressure and heart rate go up. So if you skip your regular coffee, that surging blood can trigger a caffeine headache.
It's like trying to get a fire hose to pump blood up through your skull.
If you're a caffeine lover, your brain has actually changed. It now functions normally on caffeine. How much caffeine do I have to drink to change the physiology of my brain?
Not very much.
Not very much, like even a cup
One
a
cup a
day.
day will change your brain.
1 cup a day will change your brain. Now, anybody students here? We got some students? Yeah? Good? Yes? If you want to be a really smart, top, straight A student, go to sleep when you're supposed to go to sleep and study as hard as you can study, but don't stay up all night trying to study and drinking caffeine to study. Because do you think it's going to help you think by reducing the blood flow to your brain by 40%? That's going to help you on the test the next day. The sleep will help you more. I made that a practice when I was going through school. I always went to bed at 10 o'clock, 10:30. Should have gone to bed earlier, but that was usually when the latest I would stay up. If I figured if I wasn't ready for the test by that time, it wasn't going to help me to stay up all night to try to study for the test. All right, so let's talk about a diet for overcoming addictions. A diet for overcoming addictions. This was published in the Southern Medical Journal. Notice what they said here. They put these people on a diet, 6 months on fresh and vegetable diet, 62% raw by calorie. That's a pretty large amount of raw food. This produced an 8-pound weight loss and an 18-millimeter decrease in blood pressure. I think the researchers were expecting that, but they said serendipitously. What does that mean? Serendipitously. That means shockingly, but pleasantly, surprisingly, right? Like an amazing shock. Serendipitously, they said 80% of those in this study who smoked or drank abstained spontaneously. They quit smoking and drinking without even trying. Can you imagine that? They weren't expecting that. So now, what do you think these people who are on this diet, what do you think that they probably didn't get taught about excitotoxins, right? But what did they inadvertently do when they went on this diet? They just got rid of excitotoxins out of their diet. Is that right? Pretty much. If you're eating 62% raw by calories, fresh fruits and vegetables, you just eliminated most excitotoxins. Is that right? So this is one of the most powerful things you could ever know about overcoming an addiction, any addiction. If someone is trying to overcome an addiction, they're very likely going to be unsuccessful if they don't know about and implement an excitotoxin-free and a caffeine-free diet. Because those two things right there are tripping out your nerves, your brain cells. Of course, caffeine in itself is an addiction, right? Caffeinated beverages are not providing you anything that you need. The caffeine is just stimulating those nerve cells. It's giving you a buzz, and if you get off that, you're going to feel worse for a while. But eventually, you're going to feel way better in the long run. So if you're trying to gain addiction over something really maybe super addictive like tobacco or alcohol, some of those really serious ones, or cocaine, or a sexual addiction, you're going to have to get off the caffeine and the excitotoxins all at the same time. All at the same time. That's hardcore, but that's going to make you successful with God's help. You're going to need God's help too, right? Because He's going to have to help you with self-control and help you with that determination. But He'll bless you if you are determined to do it. And if you know these two things, you can be powerfully more successful than you could in any other way. Because these are the things that are tripping off. These are the more socially acceptable addictions. And these are the addictions that are tripping off the other more hardcore addictions. Now, this doesn't mean to say that somebody who eats excitotoxins is automatically going to end up on crack cocaine, right? If somebody just by principle isn't going to do cocaine, they probably never get there. But the fact is, if they're on multiple addictive substances, these addictions are always going to trip off those more difficult addictions or those more hardcore addictions, whether it's cocaine or methamphetamines or even pain medications from the doctor's office, right? People get addicted to those. Morphine, Dilaudid, all those different things. So this is a super powerful tool. That's why I call it the science of addiction. This is the most powerful tool you could know about. And I'm guessing most of you have never even heard of this. Now I'm going to add to this one more powerful thing to your arsenal, okay? Because I want you to be successful. If you're going to be serious about getting off any addiction you're on, I want you to be successful. And God wants you to be successful as well. So I'm going to give you one more tool. Besides prayer, that one you need, right? And that's vitamin B3. We talked about vitamin B3 earlier. Well, what you may not know is I told you about vitamin B3 for getting down your cholesterol last night. Vitamin B3 will also help you get over an addiction. And apparently it has to do with the fact that your body is craving something when it's missing something. And giving it the things it needs helps it not to have to crave the things it doesn't need. Does that make sense? The co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, he figured out, after he founded the 12-step program, he figured out that niacin, vitamin B3, was more powerful than his 12-step program. And do you know what he did? He was serious about trying to get people off alcohol because he had been an alcoholic himself. And he'd finally gained the victory. So guess what he was doing? He was running around the whole country promoting vitamin B3. And you know what they did? They fired him from his own organization. Yes. They didn't want to talk about vitamin B3 because that's too easy. They wanted to have their 12-step program. And they didn't want to hear anything about vitamin B3. Vitamin B3 is also a very powerful way of getting off smoking. Smoking is one of the most difficult addictions to overcome. Do you know that? They say it's even more difficult than cocaine. It's very difficult. And that's because there's at least 600 chemicals that the tobacco companies are putting in those cigarettes to make them more addictive. But vitamin B3 can help stop smoking. So now you have another powerful tool for yourself or for your friend or relative or family member or enemy or your kids, yeah? Vitamin B3. Usually the B3 is more effective if they're already stopping, especially the alcohol. But they have found that people who took it for a significantly long time actually slowly did eventually wean themselves, some of them were able to wean off. But typically it's more effective if you take it in large amounts when you're stopping. So you want to prepare yourself. Prepare yourself through prayer. Prepare yourself through a diet. Figure out what your diet is going to look like. Get the stuff you need to have the healthy diet. And then quit it all at once. God will give you the help. If it's alcohol, you might have to taper it some, all right? At least if you're really, some of your other hard street drugs need some tapering too. Vitamin C is also a very powerful thing for neutralizing those toxins. Vitamin C, intravenous vitamin C, can help people get off methamphetamines and stop the withdrawal symptoms. Okay, that's all extra credit. Let's go back to our subject of excitotoxins. So excitotoxins are now linked in the scientific literature to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's, Huntington's, multiple sclerosis, Lewy body syndrome, dementia, migraine headaches, seizures, episodic violence, ADHD, learning disorders, restless leg syndrome, arthritis, cancer, obesity, impaired immune function, infertility, high triglycerides, high cholesterol, rage and aggression, impaired cardiovascular response, endocrine disorders, and more. Is that a list of diseases you want? You might be thinking, that's fine, but I don't eat MSG or aspartate. How do you know that? Some of you should have a question in your mind by now. What are the names? Remember I told you they started using disguised names? What are the disguised names? I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about it right now. Here is a list of disguised names. When you start out, just keep this on your phone. It with you all the time, and you can avoid these things in the store. Eventually, you'll have this memorized. I don't have to have it on my phone. I don't have to look at it. The first one is monosodium glutamate. That's not too disguised, unless you don't know it's the same as glutamate. And let me warn you, because the food companies are tricky. They'll actually put on the label of some foods, no MSG added. Have you ever seen that? Well, they don't have to add it because their product already has it in there in high levels. That's a misleading statement. Or they might say no added glutamate because it has MSG in there. Or they might say, they can even say no MSG because it actually has glutamate, not monosodium glutamate. So there's all kinds of ways that they can get around this. All right, glutamic acid is the same thing. Here's one. Hydrolyzed vegetable protein. Now, has anybody ever heard of that one? That's one of the worst. You know why? Because it has very high levels of 3 excitotoxic substances. Glutamate, aspartate, and cysteic acid, all in one. That's the first ingredient in all of your fake meat products. Yes? Ooh. Is it okay for me to start stepping on some toes? This is going to affect our tables if we want our brains to be at prime optimal optimization, okay? It's going to affect our diet if we want our brains to be optimized. Hydrolyzed vegetable protein. Any kind of hydrolyzed protein. It can be any protein extract, isolate, concentrate. So it could be something like soy protein extract, corn protein isolate, pea protein concentrate. Anytime they say protein extract, isolate, or concentrate, what they're doing is they're taking the naturally occurring amino acids in that food, they're extracting them and concentrating them so that they can put them in there as an addictive substance and have it under a different name. That's what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. So it could be something like whey protein extract. Whey comes from milk. So milk has those same amino acids in them. They can extract them there and turn them into free amino acids. The problem is not how they are. So tomatoes and soybeans have a fair amount of glutamate in them. That doesn't mean you don't eat tomatoes and soybeans, right? Because those are how God made it. The problem is when you start extracting it from the soybeans and the tomatoes and concentrating it, isolating it, and putting it in concentrations that your body doesn't know how to deal with. Textured protein. Yeast extract. Yeast is a protein. Autolyzed yeast. Anybody ever heard of Vegex or Marmite? Pure 100% brain poison. Yes? Mm-hmm. I used to eat that in Africa. I was addicted to it. I grew up in Africa. I loved it. Vegemite, Marmite, yeah, Vegex. There's all kinds of different ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Protease, seasonings. Have you ever read a bottle of seasoning that said every kind of seasoning that you could think of, and then at the bottom it said seasonings? Haven't you ever wondered about that? That's the secret ingredient. That's the secret ingredient that they don't want to tell you what it is that makes it addictive. I used to use a seasoning salt called Spike. Has anybody heard of that one? Okay. Notice I said I used to. So when I figured this out, I looked at the ingredient list and I was like, oh no, it's got this stuff in it. And I was like, what am I going to do? Because I used to put that on everything. I couldn't keep it in the cupboard. So I decided, all right, I'm going to take it and I'm going to make my own. So I looked on the ingredient list and I took all the different seasonings from the cupboard and I made something that tasted pretty good. Guess what? I don't make it anymore. Why? It wasn't addictive. That's right, it wasn't addictive. They know good and well that that's what keeps you buying their product. They can see it on the bottom line. Bouillon, maltodextrin, monopotassium glutamate, hydrolyzed oat flour, sodium or calcium caseinate. What's casein? Milk protein. Milk protein. So they're messing with the protein again. Natural flavors. Now that's in almost everything, right? And by the way, that could include probably 9,000 different ingredients. Because that could be, I'm told that for a period of time, I don't know if they still do this, but at least for a period of time, when they said natural vanilla flavor, they were actually getting that as an extract from the anal gland of a beaver. It's natural. Come on, what's the matter? It's natural. That's what I'm wondering. Who was going around figuring out that it tasted like vanilla? Oh, man. Just because it's natural doesn't mean you want to eat it. You understand what I'm saying? Just because it's natural doesn't mean you want to eat it. All right. Flavor. I'm getting to that one, yeah. Flavor. That's just like natural flavors. Malt extract, enzymes, spices. Now, this is another thing. You see it on the spices, and they'll say all the different spices, and then they'll say spices. So you know what I figure? Spices is not really telling you anything. When they say spices on your food, that means they don't want to tell you what it really is. So what I figure is if they don't want to tell me what it is, I don't want to eat it. This makes shopping actually a lot easier in some ways. You only stick to one section of the grocery store. And if you do go down one of the other aisles, you just take a look and you take a look and you don't have to read it. You just look at the length of the ingredient list, right? If you see an ingredient list like this, put it back on the shelf. You don't have to read it because you know it's going to have one of these things in it. Carrageenan, that comes from seaweed. That's put in all the soy milks to make them taste good. Anybody heard of silk soy milk? Ooh, that tastes good. In fact, you put it right next to a nice organic soy milk that has just soybeans and water. And take some of the silk and put some in each one of 2 glasses and taste them both side by side. You'll know why they put the carrageenan in the silk. You'll know it, okay? It's gonna taste way better. But you don't need your food to have this artificial buzz. If you get used to the soy milk that's just soybeans and water, pretty soon it'll be just fine. And you don't have to have all that other stuff in the ingredients in order to make it taste good. The food, actually, you'll start to taste the more natural flavors of the food, no pun intended, the flavors that God put in the food, instead of having that artificial buzz. All right, broth stock amino acids. Amino acids, anybody heard of Bragg's amino acids? Yeah, that's pure 100% brain poison. That's all just, I know, cooks, I know it's your secret ingredient. It's what makes the food taste good. I understand that. You can learn how to cook without cooking with stuff that's going to blow your brain. You really can. And you can make the food taste good. I know this. My mom has all kinds of amazing things that she cooks for the patients at our retreat. She teaches people how to cook like this. And people are blown away by her food. And it doesn't have all these artificial means of blowing you away. Soy sauce. Soy sauce is just pure, extracted, fermented, broken down free amino acids. You know, they have actually a medical diagnosis called Chinese restaurant syndrome. Did you know that? Yeah. Chinese restaurant syndrome. But if you go to a restaurant supply store, I don't know if you have this out here, but in Washington we have a restaurant supply store that used to be called Cash and Carry. They keep changing their name. And then they turn to United Grocers, and then there's something else. Anyway, it's a restaurant supply store. Maybe you have something like that out here. And if you go to that store and you walk down about the middle of the store, in the aisle down low on the left-hand side, you will find 50-pound bags of MSG. 50-pound bags. Is it only the Chinese restaurants that are using that? No. Why do they call it Chinese restaurant syndrome? No, because all of them are putting the MSG on the food. That's why the restaurant food tastes better than your home-cooked food when you compare it side by side. All of the restaurants are using it. Why do you have Chinese restaurant syndrome? Because they put a bunch of MSG on your food in the back, and then they serve it, and what do? You pour it full of soy sauce. Now you just doubled, quadrupled, 10 times the amount of excitotoxins on that food. That's why. Yes?
What is the other side?
Tamari, same thing. So let me tell you this. Anytime you ferment anything, it's going to take the bacteria that causes the fermentation, or the yeast. If the fermentation process is allowed to go along enough, those bacteria are going to break down those proteins into individual free amino acids and make it excitotoxic. That's why any fermented product is addictive. Think about vinegar. It's addictive, right? Who would like the taste of vinegar if it wasn't addictive? You wouldn't, right? Yes. Yes, we have a cookbook, and we did not bring any along. I did not even think about it. I should have. Yes, we do have it available if you want to call us, and we can ship it to you. Yes.
So I've heard that sourdough bread is better than regular bread.
Yes.
Is that bad because it's fermenting?
Yes. I've also heard that white wine is good for your heart, right? Or red wine is good for your heart, right? Is that true? No, it's not true. Sourdough bread is not good for you, no. Nor sauerkraut. Not good for you. The reason why they're trying to promote these products is because they're trying to find some reason to say, oh, it's good for you, right? And so supposedly you need the bacteria that's in there. And it's true that if you just killed all your gut bacteria with an antibiotic course, you're going to need to replace them. But you know, you can get a probiotic in a pill. You don't have to get it in sauerkraut. You don't need all the extra excitotoxins that are in the fermentation products of sauerkraut or anything else that's fermented. And by the way, I have a whole lecture just on vinegar and alcohol. I don't have time to go into that, but vinegar is highly addictive with lots of vinegar actually has high levels of alcohol left in it. Higher levels of alcohol left in it than what the US government allows for a beverage to be called non-alcoholic. It would classify as an alcoholic beverage under US guidelines. Yes. And the reason why they do that is because it makes it taste better. They leave some alcohol. See, vinegar is the end product of the fermentation cycle. You start out by fermenting something, and you get, like when you're doing bread, you have the yeast product. At first, the yeast is just making carbon dioxide. That's not a problem. It hasn't broken down these substances into free amino acids yet. Then eventually, it starts to turn into alcohol, which it happens before the sourdough bread is totally sour. It's actually turning into alcohol. And then the alcohol continues, and the sugars in the alcohol break down into acetic acid. That's vinegar. So vinegar is the end product of fermentation of alcohol. And so it's part of, so that's something very important also for people to know if they're trying to get off addictions, especially an alcohol addiction.
So
No, it's not. And there's many, many scientific reasons why I can show you that, but I don't have the time for all of that information tonight. Any kind of the vinegars, yeah. Vinegar paralyzes your gut. Anybody, well, I won't ask anybody to raise their hands. Anybody have issues with constipation? Vinegar is one primary thing that's going to paralyze your gut. Oh, yes. Vinegar paralyzes the gut. Vinegar is dangerous on many accounts. Let me actually tell you one more thing. As things ferment, they actually rot and they create molds. If you've ever seen somebody make sauerkraut at home before, my grandmother used to do this. She would literally scrape off this massive thing of mold off the top of the sauerkraut and throw it away. High levels of aflatoxins in fermented products. Aflatoxin is one of the most carcinogenic substances known to man. And high levels of that in vinegar or any kind of fermented product because of that fermentation process. And aflatoxin is a toxin that comes from the mold. Molds are very, very toxic. All right, so I'm going to have to wrap this up here because I still have a few stories to tell. I know you're full of questions. Let me just address the brewer's yeast, though. Do you know why they call it brewer's yeast? Because it's the sludge at the bottom of the beer barrel. Yeah. Yes, it is. It's exactly the same thing. It comes from the same species of yeast, and it's the same sludge. It's just that they realized that there was such a demand for it that they started making it for its own sake instead of for the beer's sake, and then they gave it a different label to get away from the stigma of the brewery. But it is the exact same stuff.
Exact same
As the brewer's yeast, yeah. It might have slightly different tastes because of what they're fermenting to get it.
You say nutritional yeast is the same as?
Same as brewer's yeast, yes. Same yeast species. There's probably a little bit of a different taste because of what they're using to get it. In the beer, they're probably fermenting corn or hops or whatever they're using to make beer. In the nutritional yeast, they're fermenting something else, and they're not selling the beer. They're selling just the nutritional yeast. So there may be some flavor differences, but it's the same stuff. Same free amino acids in it. Regular yeast is it would get to the excitotoxic point, or I wouldn't eat it straight, but it's not a whole bunch of dead cells of yeast like the brewer's yeast is. That's like the carcasses of the yeast. The bread yeast is live yeast, and it's supposed to grow, and it creates the carbon dioxide in the bread. So it's not a good plan to eat real fresh bread, though, because some of that yeast hasn't died off yet. So you do want the yeast to be dead, but there's very little yeast in bread in comparison to what you're scooping, nutritional yeast. By the way, my mom at a recent health retreat that we did, the patients just about had a mutiny. What am I going to put on my popcorn if I can't use nutritional yeast? So they got together and they came up with a recipe for fake nutritional yeast. And it's pretty amazing, I have to say. So you'll have to, if you want me to, I'll have to get it to you somehow. Give my wife a... Yeah, the patients came up with a recipe. They actually decided to do it with potato flakes, dried potato flakes. So it looks like nutritional yeast. It doesn't work quite the same in foods as it does otherwise. But to put on your popcorn, hey, they were happy. All right. Let's talk about some personal case studies just to show you how powerful this is. And I know I only have 5 minutes left, but I really want to tell you these stories, okay? These are going to take more than 5 minutes, I'm sorry. Do I have your permission? Yes. All right. We used to run an assisted living facility, so we're quite familiar with taking care of elderly people and how to improve their health. We had one of the most unique assisted living facilities ever in the state of Washington. No other facility that I know of has ever done what we did. And the state inspectors were just blown away. They said, "You have a very low turnover rate." And we're like, yeah, our patients don't die. Well, they don't die like they die in other nursing homes. I mean, and when they would just live for a long, they'd improve when they come. And the family members are amazed. And they would literally improve, and then When they did die, they would finally just die very quickly in a couple weeks. They weren't like slowly going downhill like people do in normal nursing homes. Anyway, I was there one day, and a family came over to the assisted living and said, "Can you please come over and assess our father? He's in the hospital," which was right across the street, "and we'd like him to come to your facility." I said, "Sure." So I went over to the hospital. I did the assessment. He was way off the chart. I mean, we wouldn't even accept somebody like this normally. But I had just learned about excitotoxins, and we had just implemented an excitotoxin-free policy for the whole assisted living facility. Probably has never been done in the world before. And we had good results before we did that, but when we did that, oh man, we had amazing results, especially with the cognitive problems. So I said to the family, I said, well, normally I wouldn't accept him because he's way too heavy of care. But I said, I'd be willing to try if you understand that if he doesn't improve very rapidly, in about a month, we'll have to move him somewhere else. But I said, we've just implemented something in the diet there that I think will help him. Now, I'd never tried this before. I just had a suspicion. The caregivers weren't too happy with me. Because here's this guy that we just admitted, who's about double the care that we should be giving him. George was his name. I mean, he was in bad shape. At the hospital, the doctor said he's never going to walk again. He'll never talk again. He was hallucinating, picking at things in the air. He couldn't say anything that made any sense. And the doctor said he's rapidly going to decline to death. That's what the prognosis was. He had a disease called Lewy body syndrome. That's a part of the brain. He got to our facility, and in 3 weeks, he walked a half a mile without his walker down the street. Now, nobody knew he could do this. So fortunately, some kind driver on the street saw what was happening, saw the sign, and brought him back. And so all the caregivers are standing around in a huddle around him, and he's looking around at everybody, and everybody's chattering, and we're thanking the guy who brought him back. And George looks around at everybody and says, well, if I would have known it would have caused this much problem, I never would have done it. Remember, he couldn't talk either. George started being able to shave himself with a straight blade razor, to eat on his own, to converse with the family. He didn't reverse all his dementia. You can't overcome a lifetime of this kind of damage. But he had amazing improvement, and the family was just excited beyond belief because they had their dad, their granddad back. Well, he'd been there for a little while. A couple of weeks later, one day I'm walking down the hallway in the assisted living facility, and I see one of the caregivers carrying a can of pop. That stuck in my head because we didn't serve pop there. But I didn't say anything right then. And a little bit later in that evening, the caregivers called me. They said, please come and help us with George. We can't do anything with him. I said, oh. So I went down to his room. He was totally incoordinate again. And George was strong. He was about 80 years old, but the guy had muscles. He was a short little guy, infectious smile, but he had muscles like you wouldn't believe. He used to be a steel worker, carrying steel around, I guess. And he was strong. So, he's holding onto the bars in the bathroom, and we're trying to get him to stand up, and we tell him to stand up, and he lifts his leg. Nothing's computing. We finally get him to bed, and my mind goes back to the can of pop. So I go in looking for that caregiver, and I find him, and I say, hey, what was up with the can of pop? And he said, well, George's family brought it in for him, and I knew it wouldn't be good for him, so I poured half of it down the drain, but then I felt a little guilty, so I gave him the other half. I said, where'd you throw the can? He said, which garbage can? I dug through the garbage. I went and pulled it out. Store brand grape soda. This wasn't Monster or Jolt or Death or whatever else they drink nowadays. This was store brand grape soda. And I looked at the ingredient list, 7 different hidden names for excitotoxins. It took George 3 weeks to recover from that half a can of pop. 3 weeks. Pretty soon he's back to what he was after the first 3 weeks, and all of a sudden, Caregivers call me, please come and help us with George. I go down to his room. He's totally out of whack again. Help them get him in bed. I go looking for the caregiver. Was George's family here today? Yes. Did they bring him some food? Yes. What was it? It was an apple fritter. I said, where do you throw the packet? I dug through the garbage, pulled out the packet. 5 different hidden names for excitotoxins. It took George 2 weeks to recover from that apple fritter. I called the family. I said, listen, I've got to have you do something. If George is going to be here, we can't have the family bringing him food. Now, George, everybody loved George. He had grandkids and great-grandkids, and it seemed like hundreds of them. And they were always visiting from all over the country, and they'd show up without warning, and they knew that George loved to eat. And so they were always bringing stuff for him to eat. And I said, if he's going to stay here, we're going to have anything that they want to bring him to eat. It has to come to the kitchen first, and we will decide when or if he gets it. The son and daughter who were the POA, son and daughter-in-law, were the POA, and they said, no problem, because they really wanted him to stay at our facility. So they let everybody know. George continued, obviously we didn't really reverse all of his dementia, but he continued there having a good quality of life for about 3 years with us, I think, 3.5 years maybe. There was no reason for him to be imminently dying. He was still strong as an ox. He was maybe 84, I think, by that time. And it was coming time for us to move. We were actually planning to go and start the health retreat that we're running now. And so we were actually going to be closing the facility. So we'd let the family know, and they were trying to find a place for him, and they had found a place, and my mom was involved in running the place too, and she talked to the family and said, have you told George yet? They said, no, we haven't told him. A few days later, she says, have you told George yet? No, we haven't told him. She's like, do you want me to tell him? Yes, please, you tell him. This was now the day before he was supposed to move. So my mom went to George and she said, George, we didn't really want to do this. I mean, we knew that he wasn't going to get the food that he was used to getting here. We knew it wasn't going to be good for him. It was hard because we felt like they were family members to us. But Mom said to him, George, tomorrow you're going to be moving to a different facility. Now we had a unique facility in more ways than one, just the food, but the architecture we had, the whole place was built like a family, like a central living room with rooms around the outside, 2 sections like that, 2 living rooms with rooms. So there was no hallways. It wasn't any kind of an institutional thing. And in the new section where he lived, there was a 2-story, and there was a balcony around the top where the offices were. So it was a big 30-foot vaulted ceiling. And George looks up at the vaulted ceiling and looks at the balcony, and he says, there's room enough here for me, isn't there? George moved to the new facility. And 3 weeks later, he was dead. 3 weeks later. His body couldn't handle the excitotoxins. This is serious. If you're serious about your health, if you're serious about getting away from addictions, if you're serious about your brain, your ability to communicate with God, you need to get off all the stuff that these tobacco companies are putting in your food, these 10,000 ingredients. If you want to be healthy, this is very serious. This is serious enough to kill somebody. We had no idea that he was going to die that fast. Like I said, we knew it wasn't going to be good for him, but 3 weeks later, he was dead. Some people think, oh, this is going to be a real drag. I'm going to have to give up all this different stuff that's my favorite food. No, it's not a drag. This is not some kind of a cross to bear. This is a massive blessing. And I can tell you I know about this personally because my wife was starting to have serious symptoms of multiple sclerosis when I heard about excitotoxins. And I saw that multiple sclerosis was on the list of things caused by excitotoxins. She was in the process of being worked up at some big institutions. We heard about excitotoxins. We got rid of excitotoxins, all of them out of our cupboard. I was addicted to these things too. And I figured, she has the problem, but I'm not going to put something in my brain that's going to poison my brain. So we got rid of all excitotoxins out of our cupboards. And by the way, you might think that this is difficult to do. It might seem overwhelming at first. Trust me, it's not overwhelming. If we can do this in an assisted living facility with hired cooks, I can guarantee you can do it at home. You can do this. Her symptoms of MS have gone completely away, as long as we stay away from excitotoxins. Is that a deprivation, or is that a blessing? You see, I could probably be turning her in bed every 2 hours, or every half an hour, whatever, if she's completely paralyzed with multiple sclerosis, or I could stop eating some of the toxins that the food industry is trying to shove down my throat. Which one's a better choice? She used to have restless leg syndrome. Once in a while, she still does, if we get into excitotoxins. My grandmother used to have this, and I could have fixed her problem if I would have known this before she died. She had a big bottle of, what do they call it? Accent. You know what that is? That's MSG. Pure 100% MSG. So my wife had restless leg syndrome at night in the bed. She would wear holes in the sheets where her feet would move. It was that bad. And it would keep me awake. And I was like, this is bad. And so this started to wane as we got off excitotoxins. But one day I was walking through the assisted living facility. I opened up the cupboard and I pulled out something called Ensure. Heard of that? It's supposed to ensure health for elderly people and gain weight if they need to. And I'd never really thought about it before, but I just kind of instinctively by this time flipped it around and looked at the ingredient list, and I was like, whoa, 5 different hidden names for excitotoxins. I was like, we can't keep using this. I mean, this was after we had already gotten rid of all the excitotoxins we thought out of the facility. So I grabbed that can. I went up to my apartment, which was in the facility, and I started making a recipe. I got stuff out of the cupboard and I started figuring things out. I was like, I'm going to make a calorie for calorie replacement for this that's got none of this stuff in it. So, of course, I had to taste it. So I flipped it open. She has the problem, not me. I mean, I'm not going to eat this on a regular basis, but I'm going to just, this is no big deal. I'm just trying this to figure out this recipe to make sure we don't have to eat this or feed this to our residents. So I made a recipe, and I calculated all the calories, and I made a calorie for calorie replacement that had more calories than the Ensure, and it tasted pretty much similar. And in the meantime, I drank about half a can. You know those little cans? They're little cans. I drank about half a can of that Ensure, just tasting it. Not that I wanted to taste it. I was just trying to make the recipe. You know that night? I had restless leg syndrome, and I couldn't sleep. And I realized it's not her that has the problem. This is not an allergy or a sensitivity. This is a toxin to everybody's brain. The reason why some people have more severe symptoms than others is because some people have more head injuries than others. The reason why some people notice it and others don't is because of these head injuries. It's damaging everybody's brain. And most people in the United States have no idea what it feels like to feel normal. And once you get off these substances for a little while, and if you accidentally get some more in them, hey, some old friends just came in. if you get off it for just a little while and then you go back and get some accidentally in potluck or something like that, or Christmas dinner, you're going to know now what the symptoms are, because your body is going to be like, has let down its guard because you haven't had it for a while, and now all of a sudden, there it is. It's going to affect your eyesight. It's going to affect your head. It's going to give you cramps. It's going to give you all kinds of symptoms. Most people don't know what it's like in this country to feel normal off this stuff. We've had patients who had intractable migraine headaches. We had one guy who went from coast to coast, even went to the Mayo Clinic to try to figure out his migraine headaches. He had to retire from work at 55 because he had continuous migraine headaches. Can you imagine that? I know what a migraine headache is like because I had them, and they went away when I got off excitotoxins. I thought, that's very interesting. In fact, they went away before I even knew about excitotoxins because I left Africa and I stopped eating some of the stuff that I had been eating. So this guy, he came to our retreat. He did some hyperbarics to help his brain heal. We got him off excitotoxins and we taught him about them. And within 10 days, he was 90% migraine headache free. 10 days. He left our facility and he went back to work and he got a job running a facility like we run. And we talked to him some years later and we said, how are you? Do you get migraine headaches anymore? He said, I get them once in a while. And he says, when I get them, I know why. Yes. We had a lady who skipped one of our classes. She was supposed to be there the first 2 nights. I called her up. I said, how come you missed the lectures? Because she'd paid. She said, well, I had a migraine headache. I said, how often do you have migraine headaches? She said, it'd be easier for me to tell you how often I don't have a migraine headache. She said, I have them all the time. She says, I've had one for the last 3 weeks. I said, oh, I've had migraine headaches. I don't know what it would be like to have it for 3 weeks. She got off caffeine and excitotoxins. This was before we were doing hyperbarics in this case. And in 3 weeks, she had not had a single migraine headache. She said, I don't even remember the last time I went 3 weeks without a migraine headache. She was so amazed. But you know what happened with her? She went back to her old way of eating and she went back to the migraine headaches. That's how addictive this stuff is. I don't personally understand that. I way rather give up something that I'm used to drinking or eating and get rid of the migraine headaches. But this stuff is addictive. So you're going to need God's help to get off these things. We've had patients with seizures. We had one patient who's so brain damaged, his head was run over by a car at age 12. His family brought him to us at age 21 or something like that, or 22. He was just in the bed. He couldn't talk. They fed him through a feeding tube, and he was mostly unresponsive, but he had lived all that time. And he was having intractable grand mal seizures, multiple grand mal seizures every day. The family didn't know what to do. We did hyperbarics with him, and we got him off excitotoxins. He was getting formula. The formula has about 7 different ingredients for hidden excitotoxins. So we said, we suggested a novel idea to them. How about you feed him some real food? Actually make some food, blend it up in a blender, mix it with some water, and put it in the feeding tube. So they got us a good blender, Vitamix, and that's what they were doing. Well, he lost enough weight to reverse his diabetes just like that. And they didn't even know he had diabetes until he came to us. We diagnosed him. This made it easier for his brothers because his brothers had to lift him in and out of bed and out of the car and into the wheelchair. But he started losing so much weight, apparently they weren't getting quite enough calories in him because it was a lot more difficult to get the stuff with fiber through the tube. And so pretty soon, after a year, he'd been a year without grand mal seizures. We got him off all 4 of his seizure medications, and he went a year with no seizures. Can you imagine that? Just by getting him off excitotoxins and doing hyperbarics with him. The family was just over the top excited. Grand mal seizures are scary. And he's having these every day. I mean, the visiting nurses start coming and they start saying, hey, he's losing too much weight. You got to get him back on the formula. They're like, no, we don't want to do that. But they kept giving him pressure. No, he's got to have more weight. He's losing too much weight. So finally they gave in to the pressure, and they gave him over 2 days, 1, 2, 3 cans on the one day, 1, 2, 3 cans on the next day. 30 minutes after the 6th can of formula, he had his first grand mal seizure in over a year. They stopped. They thought, well, this must be what Martin told us about. A couple weeks went by, no more seizures. They thought, well, and the visiting nurses are still coming. You got to give him more formula. You got to give him more formula. He's got to have more weight. So they took 1 more can of formula. They gave him another can of formula. 30 minutes after that can of formula, 2nd grand mal seizure in over a year. Can you imagine? He had a brain that was mush. He had no blood-brain barrier. Of course he's going to have seizures with excitotoxins. This is how powerful this is. This is a serious toxin that is being put in our food, which is causing this kind of level of chronic disease burden in this country. Not only that, but it's causing all these other addictions, which is making lots and lots of money for the companies that make those products. But it's not doing your health any good. They're not doing your health any good. Our bodies, the Bible says, are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Can we glorify God by putting these things in them? Our brain is how we communicate with God. Here's some resources for further study. I have a video called Toxic Gourmet on this subject. These are some of the resources that I use to come to a knowledge of this subject. Let's have a few questions. I know we're over time, but we need to take a few minutes for some questions. Yes?
You talked about,
Let's wait for the microphone because we have a roving microphone here. That way the live stream can hear the questions.
you talked about the baking soda. I've got a gluten-free recipe that calls for baking soda. But if the baking soda does not have aluminum in it, is that okay?
Okay, so baking soda is not an excitotoxin. It makes L-cysteine toxic. But I usually give people some extra credit when I talk about this lecture about baking soda. So let me go off on the extra credit, okay? Baking soda is, for many reasons, not something you want to put in your body. First of all, baking soda will clean acid off your batteries, right? It's an extreme base. So if you take something like that into your stomach, what does it do to your stomach acid? It neutralizes it. So now your food does not digest. It putrefies. So you have 2 problems. Now you are malnourished because you're not getting the nutrients from that meal because it's not digesting. Number 2, now your food is now putrefying, which means it's making all kinds of toxic byproducts that's going to contribute to colon cancer later. So that's not a good plan. The other thing that happens is when your body gets the acid in the stomach neutralizes, guess what it is? It's not just a machine like the battery, right? The battery has no response. Your body says, whoa, we don't have enough acid. So what does it start doing? It starts making more acid. And then pretty soon the person has got problems right here, right? We call it heartburn. It's not really your heart, it's actually the acid coming up your throat. They tell you to drink baking soda for that, and that's going to perpetuate the problem. Yes, it's going to neutralize the acid right then, so it might give you some relief right then, but it's going to perpetuate the problem because the body is going to say, we don't have enough acid to digest our food. We better make some more acid. So guess what it's going to do? You're going to end up with more and more and more acid, and the baking soda is never going to solve the problem. There's another reason why you don't want to eat baking powder, baking soda, and that is everybody, all the grade schoolers know that how does the oxygen get to the cells? In the blood, get more specific. A red blood cell, can you get more specific than that? Hemoglobin. The hemoglobin molecule on the red blood cell is what carries the oxygen to the cell. Is that right? But who can tell me how the carbon dioxide gets back from the cell? Does anybody know that? It's not the hemoglobin that carries it. It comes back dissolved in the plasma of the blood as bicarbonate. Do you know what bicarbonate is? Baking soda. And then when it gets to the lungs, it dissociates into carbon dioxide. So what I'm telling you is carbon dioxide, baking soda, is a product, a waste product of cellular metabolism. Why would you want to dump more waste product into your body? That would be like it's your job to take out the garbage this week in the house, okay? And so you go and you say, all right, I'm going to collect all this garbage. And now before I take it out, I'm going to throw it all around the room. Does that make any sense? You just made your job 100 times worse, right? You're trying to get rid of carbon, but you're trying to get rid of bicarbonate. Your body is. Why are you going to throw a bunch of more garbage in there that your body now has to pick up and try to get rid of? Baking soda and baking powder should never enter the human system. Are your toes feeling hurt yet? I'm sorry. That was extra credit. For A students, thank you for asking that question.
Do you know anything about, is it a dough enhancer? Dough
conditioners, yeah?
Yeah, dough conditioner.
Most of the dough conditioners you don't want to eat. There's a lot of dough conditioners. For example, Subway has a dough conditioner in there. You wouldn't want to eat that one. Yeah, they don't exactly tell you always what their dough conditioners are. We don't have time to go too much into that, and I don't have all the details on the top of my head either. But are some of you getting some of the implications of this right now? What does it mean? It means a whole lifestyle change, right? It means you're going to have to change where you eat, how you eat. We eat fast food, but we don't eat from any fast food restaurants. Our fast food is way faster than any restaurant. You know what we do? We go to the grocery store and put the stuff in our cupboard. When we go on a trip, we take it from the cupboard and we put it in some cool boxes. And on the road, I make the meal and I feed everybody while we drive. It's way faster. And it's good food and you know what the ingredients are. Yeah, it means you don't go out to eat because all the restaurants are using this. Yes, we go out to eat. We make special meals at home. Is this worth it? Is it worth it? What is your health worth? You're not going to know for sure what your health is worth until you don't have it. Any more questions? All right, let's have a special prayer in closing. Heaven, in the name of Jesus, we need your help and strength and guidance. We need your power to give us the ability to overcome addictions. We know we can't do this on our own, but you've promised to make your strength perfect in our weakness. We've seen how addictive these substances are, and we plead with you to use this knowledge as power, to go forward, seeing it as an amazing, abundant blessing that's beyond belief, to know this information and to be able to have power over some of these diseases by having this knowledge. I pray that you would be with each person here tonight as they make whatever steps of faith they are going to take in this. I pray that you give them conviction, and I pray that you'd give them the strength and determination to gain the victory and to remove these things from our lives that the industries are trying to make us sick with. Thank you for hearing and answering our prayers. In Jesus' name, amen. Please don't forget to come back tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Bring your friends and relatives and enemies. Yes, I wanted to tell you one thing. There's food downstairs. This is healthy food, hopefully. Just remember, maybe some of the things that are down there, I don't know for sure, have not been checked for excitotoxins yet, because maybe some of the people who brought them didn't know this. So have mercy on them. But hopefully, if there is anything like that, it'll change by next time, right? I have some books. These are some of the books we've written, and they are going to be for sale down where the food is, in the dining room. My wife will be down there. And I have several ones here. I have a verse-by-verse study of Daniel and Revelation, talking about the end times and what's going to happen in this world. I have one called Glimpses of the Open Gates of Heaven, big book. One called The Beast from the Bottomless Pit, the prophetic implications of the coronavirus. The Most Precious Message, The Infinite Gift of Calvary. My wife wrote one about the millennium, A Place for You, Camp of the Saints. We have one called Pillars of Our Faith. There's a couple other books down there, so you might look at that when you grab some of the finger food that we have available. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you tomorrow night.